What I'm picking up on the ground, in the shops and with friends, with businesses and so on, is so far ahead of what the sort of Westminster commentariat is saying.
It's not about left and right now, British politics. It's about, are you on the side of the people or are you on the side of the blob?
This industry was already on its knees, and then this bombshell then. You know, it's the final nail in the agricultural coffin.
First prize, lunch with Alison Pearson. Second prize, dinner with Alison Pearson. Third prize, the night with Alison Pearson.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. Rule of law or rule by lawyers? That's a big question facing Britain, Allison, because we seem to be ruled not by elected politicians who we can hold to account and throw out at the ballot box. Instead, it's unelectable and often pretty left-wing lawyers, unaccountable and seemingly untouchable. They're calling the shots, coming up with rulings that seem specifically designed to seriously annoy the majority of British voters. Because on Tuesday, it emerged Britain may have to accept untold numbers of migrants from Gaza after a court ruling granted a Palestinian family the right to live in Britain through a scheme designed for Ukrainian refugees. The family's application, rejected in May, was approved on appeal after a judge ruled in their favour. For many years, the British electorates voted again and again for proper border controls, a reduction in legal and a total clampdown on illegal migration. And on top of that, there's growing alarm among voters and our security and law enforcement services about an influx of terrorists entering Britain, posing a serious threat to public safety. But now a posh lefty judge, perhaps seeking bragging rights with his chums, has trounced the clear wishes of the majority of the electorate. This comes as Labour peer Lord Maurice Glassman, the driving force behind the so-called Blue Labour parliamentary caucus designed to counter the threat from reform, attacked Attorney General Richard Hermer, an old mate of Starmer. He's got to go. He's the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool who thinks that law is a replacement for politics, said Glassman, exposing a growing split at the heart of this Labour government. In other news, it's 50 years since one Margaret Thatcher became leader of the Conservative Party, and current Tory leader Kemi Badenoch just marked 100 days in the same job. Do the two women bear comparison? Does Badenoch have the makings of a Tory leadership titan or not? Farmers have been protesting in Westminster, Allison, with hundreds of tractors mustering outside Parliament. I was there. And I also went to visit friend of the podcast Catherine Burble-Singh at the incredible Michaela School in northwest London. Lots to chew on, but let's start, co-pilot, not only with your thoughts on train etiquette, about which you've written in this week's Telegraph, link in the show notes to this episode, but you've also got some other news. Now, it's not about our weight loss competition. It's that someone was lucky enough to have won you as a prize.
Now, you've made some very unchivalrous remarks about people winning me as a prize.
No, I haven't. I'm just jealous I didn't win.
Let's tell the listeners that it went along the lines of, sir, what was it?
First prize, lunch with Alison Pearson. Second prize, dinner with Alison Pearson. Third prize, the night with Alison Pearson.
Well, unbelievably, that some people had bid, indeed, in a charity auction to have afternoon tea with me in London. And I was absolutely delighted that the lucky winners were quite pleased. And indeed, Andrew and Alicia. Andrew is a farmer living not far from us in northeast Essex, and they were absolutely delightful. And I tell you, Liam, sometimes you meet people, don't you, and it's these little details they give you. And Andrew said, oh yeah, I read you every week at 4 a.m. on Wednesday morning. And I did a sort of double take, and then I thought, yeah, that's when his farmer's day starts.
It's about half an hour after you finish the actual column, isn't it?
It pretty much is. It's still hot to the touch. Yeah, but no, they did win me indeed. And of course you go along and you think, oh goodness me, am I going to be a bit of a disappointment for however many £100 they put down.
And all in a good cause.
All in a very good cause, and absolutely delightful. And we're very grateful, aren't we, because we meet listeners and readers and we just sort of get fantastic, invaluable insight. And I feel, Liam, at the moment, I feel that what I'm picking up on the ground, in the shops and with friends, with businesses and so on, is so far ahead of what the sort of Westminster commentariat is saying. One of our local hairdressers here, I was in the hairdresser this morning, they said salon round the corner, one of great repute, which people have loved for many years, they've just gone bankrupt. That's just today. Lots and lots of businesses shuttering up before these big tax rises hit in April because they just think they're not going to be able to cope. So I just think that there's a lot going on in terms of not hiring. That's another thing I'm hearing. People trying to get, pretty low-level jobs and there's nothing around. People are scraping around. So very important on Planet Normal, isn't it, to keep in touch? And you certainly were out and about this week, weren't you, meeting normal people?
And we will come on to that because we need to hear first, before we talk about Labour's legal wrangling and the rule of lawyers, train etiquette. And you made your old mum proud.
Well, I did. So I don't know what listeners think about this, but I'm sure everyone's noticed that it's gone from being verboten to make too much noise or take calls or play music on trains and the underground and so on, to just happening the whole time. And I said in my column this week that I was raised by a rather formidable, if very tiny, Welsh mother who basically believed that you interfere.
Though she be but little, she is fierce.
She is fierce. She was fierce. And I remember once, I remember being at school and we went into the local spa. Mum had spied these, shoplifters who were lads at school, of course. She marched, followed them out of the shop and said, "Put that back." And they kind of glumly.
Was that shoplifter you? Because you sort of alluded to it in your column. You didn't quite admit guilt.
No, it wasn't, but I was absolutely mortified. But yeah, so I've learnt. My mum would both sort of, tip people off if they were being rude or inconsiderate. Now, what happened to the word inconsiderate, Liam? But she'd also praise. So I've learnt actually quite a nice thing, that there's a mum on the train who's, wrangling a toddler and an angry baby. I've learnt to say, from my mother, to say something really positive and encouraging and say, "Oh, aren't they lovely? You're doing so well," and just makes a huge difference. Yeah. But yeah, so I was writing in the column, got on our train from London a few weeks ago, and a young woman on the seat opposite didn't want me to sit down. She had her boots up on the seat. She was having a very, very lively video conversation with a friend in a foreign language. And I don't know if you've noticed, Liam, that these video calls, it's more intrusive than someone just having a normal conversation in the carriage, isn't it? Because
they raise their voice, because they think they have to, because they're on a train. I'm on a train!
Yeah, anyway, after about 20 minutes of smouldering resentment, I said, we've had enough.
Did you give him the evil eye?
Yes, I did the evil eye, and then I went for it.
Harumph?
I basically did the Jane Austen, "You have delighted us long enough with your whatever language you're speaking in," and she wasn't pleased, but she did stop, and I could sense that everyone in the carriage was grateful that someone had spoken up. But it has just, I think that one of the theories is that since lockdown and COVID, there's been a sort of de-socialisation, that people are less considerate of other people. I mean, I still wouldn't go on a train and put music on and play it without headphones. I mean, who does that?
And there's also this trend that you don't have a conversation on the phone by putting the mobile phone up to your ear, as old timers like you and I do. You actually put the whole thing on speakerphone, so the whole world can hear both sides of the conversation. I did actually quote an example of, they say that the etiquette's breaking down. Obviously in cinemas you've always had popcorn and Kia Ora, whatever it is, they, and slurping and everything, which is fair enough in the movies, but it's happening in the theatre. And Andrew Scott, the slurping's another sound when it's the back row. Yes. Well, Andrew Scott, the terrific Sherlock actor, among other things, said he was absolutely aghast when he was playing Hamlet he was embarking on to be or not to be, when he looked out into the audience and there was a man on his laptop, which was during the greatest soliloquy ever written in the English language. Somebody's checking their email. When it is nobler in the mind to log on to YouTube while someone's performing Shakespeare. Yeah, anyway, so that was a little rant, and I do like everyone's feedback on that. And talking of rants, you're pretty angry, aren't you, about this legal judgment by Judge Norton Taylor, which could have very wide-ranging implications on a politically very, very sensitive question. Oh, absolutely. And I'd written a column anyway this week on Lord Herman, the Attorney General,
Prime Minister's best mate from his barrister days and the old matrix chambers, you know, making hundreds of millions of pounds from the human rights legislation with which they can get various ne'er-do-wells to stay in the country for 27 years.
Funded by taxpayers.
And then, as you said at the top, Lord Glassman, Maurice Glassman, old Labour, you know, a guy who believes in sort of common sense and the decency of when Labour represented the working classes rather than the sort of metropolitan elite. He, as you said, brilliantly, I thought, called Lord Hermer the archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. And it is just the case, Liam, I'm afraid, that arrogant progressive fools, our judicial system is riddled with these very pious individuals who feel that they can use their best friend, international law, human rights law, foreign courts, to impose a morality and a value system on Britain, which is absolutely not supported by the British public. And we did have this very prime example of that, didn't we, with this Judge Hugo Norton-Taylor working in the Immigration Tribunal system, who had allowed this Palestinian family to use the Ukrainian legislation that was designed to give Ukrainian families safety to bring in these people from Gaza. And like a lot of people, I just absolutely exploded. I mean, it is complete madness from war-torn Gaza, where children are basically brainwashed into violent anti-Semitism from kindergarten. You know, also, they're not very keen on the likes of us, Liam, you know, infidels, basically. So to bring in, to allow, to open the floodgates, potentially, as this ridiculous judge did, to allowing in possibly thousands or indeed tens of thousands of Palestinians, which would make life is already hard enough in Britain for our Jewish population. We certainly wouldn't want to see any more of those. And we have over 40,000 jihadists being watched by MI5 on the terror watch list. So we certainly don't want any more of those.
I do think Labour's got a problem with this, Allison. I do think Starmer in particular has got a problem with this. This question, is he a politician or is he a lawyer? I think the public is increasingly incensed that unelected judges, often of a left-wing disposition, can, with a flick of their pen, make major changes in our national life, and they can't be unelected by us at the ballot box. I do think there's a problem. Labour's parting shot, as they lost office in 2010, was the Equality Act, which is really the bedrock for a lot of the kind of woke-related legislation that we've seen, much of it which causes real disconsternation among ordinary voters, particularly voters with small c conservative values, social conservatives, who are, you know, traditionally both Labour and Conservative voters. And these are the people who reform is hoovering up.
Absolutely.
It's really very, very interesting what's happening, and quite alarming if you are a supporter of the Conservative or the Labour Party, because reform isn't just taking votes off disgruntled Tories, the stay-at-home Tories, which Planet Normal did so much to highlight what they were going to do before the 2024 election, didn't we? But also traditional red wall Labour voters. This is where Farage's party are now making the most gains. And a lot of it has to do with this feeling. It's not about left and right now, British politics. It's about, are you on the side of the people or are you on the side of the blob, the technocrats, the legal managerial classes who are different from the rest of us, who look down on the rest of us, who disdain the hoi polloi. And both main party leaders, Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer, have to understand this. Where Farage is coming from is putting himself on the side of ordinary people. He doesn't even have to come up with any policies at this stage. And I think this row, what Maurice Glassman's put his finger on so brilliantly, he really is a very, very powerful orator, a very, very good writer in his own right. And he's really put his finger on a real problem that the Labour Party have, but the Tory Party have that problem too. And if I was in the Tory leadership shoes, I would be attacking this issue like Billio. And indeed, that is what Kemi Badenoch led on at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday.
Let's just reflect on this, that Lord Hermer has said in the past border control is dehumanising.
Yeah.
Well, there speaks a man who divides his time between Islington and Tuscany, isn't it? I would make a random guess.
You have to have border controls when you have universal benefits. When everybody in a country is entitled to benefits, you have to have border controls. To not have border controls is completely financially irrational when you have universal benefit entitlement, universal healthcare entitlement, which we have.
But they disdain nationhood and patriotism, which I think they think is the preserve of vulgar, low, uneducated people.
People like us, we have no education, do we, Allison, between us?
We're thick as pigs, aren't we? We are.
We've got at least one maths O-level between us.
All right, you've got that one. I got mine on the second go. But yeah, so in fact, Daniel Hannan, our great colleague at the Sunday Telegraph, Lord Hannan, has described this group, I thought, rather brilliantly as the baristocracy. That's what they are. They're the new sort of posh elite, and Lord Hermer, has been involved in this absolutely farcical Chagos Islands deal, which if you tried the sort of Planet Normal test of trying to explain it to someone in Tesco, so we're going to give several billion quid, we're going to give away sovereign territory, but we're going to pay people like between 9 and 18 billion pounds to take it off our hands, and then we're going to lease it back. And we're going, you what? It is this class of human rights lawyers who seem to be able to see every point of view except the point of view of our own country. Now, Liam, I was digging around with Starmer and his human rights lawyer mates. Hermer, of course, Attorney General. The Solicitor General is another Matrix product. And there's this guy called Philippe Sands who led the Chagosians repatriation case against the UK government. And we're going to feature this in the show notes. Listeners can look at a video of Philippe Sands giving an interview after a student event at Jesus College, Cambridge, and the event was Britain and the world from Chagos to Ukraine and beyond. And when the interviewer suggested to Philippe Sands, KC, that he had taken a lot of cases against the UK, your home country, Philippe Sands said, yeah, it's really fantastic thing about Britain. I think it's probably the only country in the world where when you've been to an international court against your own country, won and humiliated them completely, they still celebrate you. So to me, that it's a very odd feeling looking at that interview.
They celebrate you if you only go to certain dinner parties
Yes.
in certain circles in certain London postcodes. The rest of the country's looking on, supping a pint and a glass of chicken wine,
Yes.
thinking, what the hell is happening here?
Yes, and he says, so Philip Sands says that, no one believes all that enemy of the people, lefty lawyer stuff. You think, stop mixing with people who only read The Guardian, mate. Because what we've seen, the Telegraph's been doing a long run of these stories now. We've just seen the past week, we've had an Albanian criminal who managed to not get deported because one of the claims was that his 10-year-old child wouldn't like the Albanian chicken nuggets as much as he liked the British chicken nuggets, presumably because Albanian chicken nuggets are made from Albanians, Liam. That's a ridiculous example. We've also had, a Pakistani guy who was a paedophile. The tribunal judge there vetoed his deportation because he wouldn't be able to be spending enough time with his children, having gone around molesting and sexually assaulting other people's children. And as you say, the vast majority of normals just simply can't believe. But there is a world inhabited by this sort of elite where that kind of absolute pernicious nonsense is deemed to be compassionate wisdom. And I've got to say, you're right that Prime Minister's questions today, this lunchtime, of course, we're recording on Wednesday afternoon, and Kemi Badenoch did indeed challenge Starmer on allowing in the Palestinians and Lord Hermer and so on. And it should be an incredibly fruitful avenue for the Tories. There are two problems really, Liam. One is that Starmer stands there and says, hang on, aren't you the party that just let in 1 million immigrants? So that always spikes her guns. It's extremely difficult to get around that. And the second thing I would say is that it's looking more and more like everything that Suella Braverman, when she was the Home Secretary, said to us, we have to leave the ECHR to stop these lawyers, this activist courts, as she warned us about, immigrant tribunal system full of these lefty judges. But when Braverman was Home Secretary, the Cabinet didn't want to leave the ECHR or repeal the Human Rights Act. I am not convinced that Kemi Badenoch wants to leave the ECHR or repeal the Human Rights Act. And I've got to say that if that's not made apparent to people like me, then the Tories are going down.
It's very interesting. I do think there's a sea change happening here, with increasingly mainstream figures now starting to blame the blob, if you like, activist civil servants in the Home Office for failing to take difficult actions across a range of quite controversial subjects. I was struck that Mark Rowley, of course, who is the relatively new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, said civil servants were part of the reason, foot dragging by civil servants, part of the reason for the failure to change rules, allowing police forces to sack officers who failed vetting procedures. Quite controversial. I don't think the previous head of the Metropolitan Police would have said that. I do agree that there's a lot here for the Tories to go at. Of course, reform are and have been anyway. And let's just think about 50 years ago. We were both just about knocking around. One of my earliest memories, actually, is as a young paper boy in 1979, when Margaret Thatcher, of course, became Prime Minister. She was elected as Tory leader in 1975. That's the 50th anniversary that was marked this week. I remember delivering a copy of the Daily Express to a house and unfolding it to look at it, as I often did, sort of reading the papers as I went. And it was the Daily Express. It was Maggie all the way. I remember that headline really clearly, because in the circles that I grew up in, London Irish working class circles, Margaret Thatcher was actually obviously a very controversial figure. And she went on to become really the nemesis of lots of people of Irish origin because of her, certainly from Southern Ireland, I should say, the Republic of Ireland, because of her very hard stance against hunger strikes in the early 80s. But I just wanted to mark that what was really interesting, I watched a lot of people in the London Irish communities I grew up in who were, small business people. They had vans, they had little building companies. And even though they would publicly diss Margaret Thatcher, quietly, I knew lots of them voted for Margaret Thatcher because under Margaret Thatcher, your small business had a chance. Under Margaret Thatcher, you were going to get less tax than you were going to get under what was then a very radical Labour Party. This was the Labour Party of, under Michael Foot, with the 1983 manifesto that the rather mercurial Labour minister at the time, Gerald Kaufman, called the longest suicide note in history. For me, Margaret Thatcher was always an absolutely fascinating character, someone who, from a very early age, I learnt was a lot more popular in private than she was in public. And I learnt then at a very young age about this concept of the silent majority of people living in Britain, which included many Irish people living in Britain who were interested in business and who were trying to make their way fair and square. She remains, of course, a very divisive character for many people. But, you have to say, and lots of my friends on the left say this, again, they say it privately, she left Britain in a much, much better state than she found it. And I think 50 years on from when she did become Tory leader, and, I've read a lot of the history of that period. Her campaign manager, of course, was Airey Neave, who the IRA then assassinated in order to kind of get at her. They were very close friends. She beat Edward Heath on the first ballot decisively. He resigned. She then beat, actually, Geoffrey Howe in the second ballot to become Conservative leader, as well as beating Willie Whitelaw, who, of course, became very, very important to her. Every Prime Minister needs a Willie. Do you remember she said that?
Yes,
brilliant quote as her kind of fixer in Parliament. She also beat Jim Pryor, who became her nemesis on the kind of One Nation part of the party, the so-called Wets. But what a titanic leader. What are your main memories of her?
Well, she was a hate figure for me. I was a student in my dungarees with my Cyclists Against the Bomb badge. Maggie, 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 out, out, out. I remember the Falklands War with horror. I've had a long journey with her, Liam, I think, from that, young firebrand, probably like some of the leftist positions now that I look on, sort of, which I criticise, was where I was. I think it took me a long time to realise what it meant that we had the first woman Prime Minister.
It was astonishing.
And of course she was patronised. She was housewife, wasn't she? Grocer's daughter.
When she became the leader, the Labour Party went around congratulating themselves and thanking Conservatives in the House, saying, you've just handed us the next 3 general elections. How wrong they were. They didn't think Britain was ready to vote for a female Prime Minister, but by God, they were.
But not only was she a woman, she was from the classes. Do you remember Alan Clark saying, oh no, I think it wasn't Alan Clark, it was Michael Heseltine.
Yeah.
People who had to buy their own antiques, that kind of. So the Tories were a sort of hotbed of condescension and snobbery.
They thought her views were so
provincial,
petty bourgeois and embarrassing. There's a brilliant quote in Matthew Parris's book, Chance Witness, where Matthew, of course, still a columnist to this day, steeped in politics as he is. He was Margaret Thatcher's correspondence secretary as a young man. He worked in her private office. He then became a Tory MP in the whip's office. And one of the top whips at the time said, and I know it is, but Matthew's never disclosed it in his book, but this whip was listening to Margaret Thatcher talking on the television, and he was so outraged by her views. The whip said, oh my God, it's a disaster. When Margaret talks without thinking, she says what she thinks. There's all of politics there in one nutshell.
I'm going to say something controversial now. I think Margaret Thatcher would be in reform in 2025. I really think she would.
Well, there's your next column, Allison. You're right, I get live on Planet Normal.
I've been looking at, in honour of this half-century anniversary of her becoming Tory leader. Needless to say, Woman's Hour, Radio 4 Woman's Hour this week had items on the stars of EastEnders turning 40, not a single mention of the most consequential female leader in modern history, one of the most consequential female leaders of all time, because she didn't hold views that the BBC agreed with. But I was reading this speech she gave in 1991 in the States, actually, the rebirth of conservatism. We Conservatives can claim to have foreseen, predicted and explained this collapse almost from the beginning, when socialism was merely an intellectual theory. But the more socialism was put into practice, the more we could point out its inevitable flaws and inherent unworkability. In the 1970s, we saw this failure in a system of high taxation, suffocating regulation that discouraged hard work, deterred enterprise, and imposed stagflation on our economies. Is this ringing any bells, Halligan?
Well, we've been saying for quite a few years on Planet Normal that it's back to the 70s, and it certainly is now in terms of the economy. We have got an economy that has stalled. We have got consumer and business sentiment at a very low ebb. We have got inflation still well above target. And it strikes me that Labour haven't got many answers. This should be a real opportunity for the Conservatives on the economy, but they don't seem to be saying too much about the economy. Reform pulled off really quite a clever political stunt this week. They were handing around at Westminster newly published paperback books called Highlights from Kemi's First 100 Days, and they had a very flattering, nice picture of the Conservative leader on the front. And then when you opened the book, every single page was blank. How do you think she's getting on?
Well, I was watching PMQs today, and I did think, those moments where you think you'd give anything to bring someone back from the grave, and how much would we love to see Margaret Thatcher eviscerating Starmer at PMQs? My God, it would be bliss, wouldn't it? I think she's been a bit quiet. If you want my honest opinion, I think she is in a very, very tricky position because she keeps talking about unity. And the reality is, Liam, what does unity mean? She says, well, we can't flesh out all of our plans at the moment, because that's not reasonable. There's a certain element of truth to that, but I increasingly think this prevarication is about party management. I think that she knows if she states things too boldly, then a quite considerable proportion of her MPs are Liberal Democrats. And that's what we saw. And it's become a truism, a very, very unfortunate truism in the Tory party, because after the dreadful general election result, there was still a kind of feeling that, oh, if we'd been a bit more unified and boasted about our successes, we'd have been okay. Now, that just isn't true. You and I know full well that why they lost was because they weren't Conservatives. And the Conservatives that we know about either stayed home or went off to reform. So I think now there's a question mark on what Kemi Badenoch feels she can say, that to some extent she is constrained. My sense is her instinct would be to give some of the full-throated conservatism that Thatcher embodied and which I know Kemi admired. She said rather touchingly this week that in Nigeria, when boys used to mock the girls and say, what can girls do? She said, you had two words, Margaret Thatcher. And that's right, and that's marvellous. But I think that she's allowing reform to make a lot of the running. I think that she hasn't gone for the jugular. I think there's a huge amount. I think Labour is screwing up the country absolutely catastrophically. Almost every area you look at, from net zero to Rachel Reeves, it's all unravelling very, very fast. But she hasn't been able to capitalise on it. And I wonder if some of that hesitancy is to do with still having to placate her centrists. What do you think, Halligan?
I think that's exactly right. And I've been saying that for pretty much the whole of the time she's been Conservative leader. I agree with the idea that you need to flesh out your policies over a period of time, have a kind of internal process. But in the meantime, you've got to say things. You've got to give some kind of signals and flares to the electorate that your values are aligned with theirs and that you get it, you get their anger. I think she needs to read out less from the dispatch box. I think she needs to look Starmer in the eye and talk from the hip more. And I know, I spent a lot of time with her in private, as you know, I know when she talks from the hip, she's a real conviction politician. And I know that her values and her instincts are absolutely aligned with Margaret Thatcher's wing of the Conservative Party. But I think she's focused on, or at least the people around her are too focused on, the wrong electorate. The electorate they're thinking of is, as you say, the Conservative Parliamentary Party, the electorate that helped her become Tory leader, because of course she had to win them over before she could be then finally chosen by the Tory members across the country. That electorate in Parliament doesn't matter for now, because if she starts saying truly conservative things, and she does get it, one of the earliest things she said, rightly I thought, and quite perceptively, was that we spoke right, but we governed left when we were in office. And that was completely true. If she starts saying truly conservative things, which challenge reform, if she starts saying truly conservative things and proposing, in outline at least, truly conservative policies, before Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe and Richard Tice start outlining them, because then she can't say them, because then she'll be following them, then the left wing of her party, the One Nation Tories, the Tories that just about clung on against the Lib Dems in some of the she home counties, if they see the Tories then gaining in the opinion polls, they'll shut up and they'll follow Kemi, right? There's nothing that generates party unity like success. And success when you're in opposition is winning in the opinion polls at the very least, winning the air war, winning the battle for hearts and minds when it comes to putting forward ideas. They don't have to be fully costed policies. Of course they don't. They have to be, as I've said, signals and flares to the electorate about what you believe in. I do think she's made some progress in some of the culture wars issues, but she doesn't like going always on culture wars. She doesn't like that because she feels she's playing into the stereotype of what she is, a black woman, rather than who she is, a really quite sophisticated political thinker and conviction person in my experience. I think she needs to be speaking a lot more about the economy. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think it's true because we are on the brink of recession. There's an awful lot of economic fear out there. And the economy, I think, is the centrepiece of where Labour is really mucking it up. And the economy is where reform is most split internally, because you've got people in reform who are really quite statist and you've got people in reform who are really quite libertarian with the economy. She should be supporting the farmers. She should be saying again and again and again. She's saying some of these things, they're not breaking through again and again and again. We will reverse this Labour proposal on inheritance tax on farmers. No ifs, no buts. But we will stop financiers using the same tax break just to buy land and dodge inheritance tax. We will impose, as I said to the farmers, I actually spoke at this farmers rally, we will impose a rule where you have to prove, and HMRC's got the tax returns, you've been a farming family for 15, 20, 25 years, whatever it is, so you are entitled to this tax break. Not that you've just bought the land out of your latest city bonus and you're using it as a way to park cash. It is legitimate to, I think, rein in the use of these agricultural property reliefs by city financiers, because that is now harming farming families who are losing those reliefs, which will lead to the breakup, unfortunately, of small farms. But there are other areas. She should be saying that she's minded to bring down corporation tax. Why? Because when you bring down the rate of corporation tax, Alison, the amount of actual tax revenue you get goes up. That's called the Laffer curve. It's one of the most basic principles in macroeconomics, and it works, and the numbers are there. I've written about the numbers many times in my weekly Telegraph column. In 2010, when corporation tax was up in the high 20s, in terms of the rate, it came down to 19% under George Osborne between 2010 and 2019. During that period, the rate, the actual amount of money from corporation tax went up, both in absolute terms and as a percentage of GDP. Why? Because there was more investment, more activity, and so on. These are proven principles of taxation. They are conservative. They are countering the big statist fiscal flatulence of Labour, fiscal irresponsibility that now has got us to the brink of what could be, a major squall on the gilt market, a major systemic moment. It's not just me saying that. Many people in the markets are worried about that as well, which would cause, a proper meltdown, which would seriously undermine our economy and do damage to broader society. There's lots more that she could be saying. And if she says stuff and she gets a bump up in the polls, then the left of her parliamentary party will follow her because they will be forced to follow her. That is leadership. She's got a much harder job than Margaret Thatcher had because she's being attacked from the left and the right. That makes it much, much more difficult. And she's still labouring under these crazy rules where it was 15%, it's now 33%, but it's still a very low bar of the parliamentary party can get together and force a vote of no confidence. But what I would say to her on this podcast is that if she says things that are conservative, the public is in the mood to respond positively to that. The Overton window at Westminster and Whitehall is very different. It's far to the left of where the Overton window is among the population as a whole. And when she starts gaining again in the polls, or at least arresting this decline, when she starts eating back into Reform's vote, and I agree with you, she's letting them make far too much headway, then the left of her party will follow. Look, if you manage to hang on to a southern Tory Shire seat when the Lib Dems, win 70 odd seats, that's a high watermark of Lib Demery, then you're going to hang on to your seat again. So I think the Tory wets really need to attract a bit of opprobrium among their posh friends and realise they need to start saying things that go down a bit better with the hoi polloi and the citizens, if you like, of Planet Normal. But they need Kemi to gird their loins and to lead them there. That's what she needs to do.
I think it's a great shame if you say that she's steering away from culture wars because she thinks it's too much home territory, too close to her being black and a woman. I don't agree with that. I think she has been at her most thrillingly authentic in the past. When I remember her once absolutely unleashing both barrels at a select committee with somebody who was talking about, some sort of trans idiocy, when Laura Kuenssberg interviewed her and said, in that sort of pursed-lipped Kuenssberg way, you've said that not all cultures are equally valid. And Kemi said, child marriage. Absolutely brilliant. Stone cold dead.
She's really good from the hip. She needs to not throw the script away at PMQs. Have a structure of what you're going to say, but throw away the actual words.
She met in the States J.D. Vance, who I'm a huge fan of J.D. Vance. I think he's one of the most brilliant people ever to become vice president. But there was an interview that JD Vance was being interviewed by one of their sort of Koonsbergs. And she gave him the sort of the usual sort of liberal moaning. And he said, "I don't care, Margaret." That's it. I don't care, Laura. This is what I think. This is what the majority of British people think. Get used to it, okay? And I think just to modify, to give praise where praise is due, she has outlined her plan to fix immigration, and it was good. There was a lot to admire. You know, if you want to stay in our country and apply for indefinite leave to remain, the time before you apply will increase from 5 years to 10 years. You must be able to contribute with a salary high enough. You must be a net contributor to Britain, and especially if you want to bring family members. If you've got a criminal record, forget it. You're banned. If you claim benefits and you need social housing, you can't even apply for citizenship. Now, this is the kind of tough talk we've seen countries across Europe having to make these changes. In France now, even under Macron, they've brought in this thing that you're not eligible for any benefits unless you've worked and contributed for 5 years. So we're having to see these liberal Western democracies really getting tough now on this problem of immigration, which is perceived to be so important. And I think that was everything that she's done with that. I think that was well said. She's talked about a numerical cap to control our borders. Again, all very good. Liam, I'm coming back to this the whole time. I'm afraid I do agree with Robert Jenrick. Actually, I'm not afraid. I agree. Sorry, let me put that again. I agree with Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, who've looked at this problem. They've worked in the Home Office. They've worked in immigration. They say in order to stop the small boats and control our borders, we are going to have to leave the ECHR. We are going to have to repeal Tony Blair's Human Rights Act, which has given such kind of allowed the sort of Lord Hermers and Philippe Sands to make hay and take hundreds and hundreds of millions and millions of pounds away from the British taxpayer to defend and advance the causes of our enemies and of people who pose a sort of criminal danger to people in our country. If she could articulate that, people don't feel safe. People don't feel it's their country anymore. She needs to start saying that, and I think she can do it, and with fire and authenticity. Then I think we could really see her going up in the polls.
I think the point, Allison, just as Blair made a point of annoying the left of his party, he made a point of showing the electorate that he agreed that the left of his party was mad with his clause 4 moment.
Yes.
We are going to remove from the Labour Constitution this sort of default thing that we always want everything nationalised. Insane, Soviet-era nonsense. Kemi, I think, has to go out, and deliberately wind up the left of her parliamentary party in order to convince most voters, certainly most voters who are going to decide the next election, abandon the really left-wing people who are never going to vote for her anyway. Not abandon them when you're Prime Minister, but abandon them in terms of your electoral strategy.
Yes.
And shift the Overton window over to the battleground of where the next election is going to be won and lost. The centre of the Overton window isn't between Ed Davey and Kemi Badenoch. It's between Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage. And if you don't get that, you don't really understand British politics and British society more broadly. I think another area where she really needs to be going in hard is education, because Catherine Birbalsingh, who runs the Michaela School in North West London, she is the leader of the opposition at the moment when it comes to education, a sort of one-woman campaigning machine, as well as running, arguably the most successful state secondary school in the country, certainly in terms of value add. She is really taking it to the government with this education bill, which is dismantling these independent academy schools. 80% of English secondary schools are now academy schools, and 40% of primary schools in England are academy schools. And that status, that independence these schools have from statist local authority control is why English schools have rocketed up international league tables of achievement, as schools, unfortunately, in Wales and Scotland have slumped or at best stayed the same. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, is dismantling this on ideological grounds. I must say, Alison, I went to Michaela School. We've interviewed Catherine Birbalsingh a couple of times now on Planet Normal. It was really very moving for me The Michaela School is literally, half a mile from where I grew up. And my education story is that, I won a life-changing scholarship age 10 to an independent school, and all my best mates went to a comprehensive school down the road, and many of them were just as smart as me, and the education they got was absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. And yet, in exactly the same part of London, kids from the same sociological background now, a pretty deprived area, a non-selective school, and Michaela, the track record is unbelievable. 52% of all GCSEs taken at Michaela School are grade 9, which is the top grade, like A double star. Eton, it's 53%. Cost the parents of Eton, 60 grand a year. Cost the parents of Michaela, 0. And of course, Eton, with huge respect to Eton, is ultra selective. It takes lots of very, very bright kids. Michaela takes whatever kids the local authority decide from a very deprived area. It is an incredible school. I left there deeply, deeply moved, not just at the brilliance of this incredible head teacher and her incredible staff and the many kids I met and spoke to, was so impressed with, but also lamenting the kind of lost education years of my own sibling, my own best friends from childhood, who I'm still very, very close to. Their education was ruined by lefty ideology, by lazy teachers, and by an unwillingness to acknowledge what works. This week's Planet Normal guest is Welsh Hill farmer Gareth Wyn Jones, making a return visit to the Rocket of Right Thinking. Gareth first joined us in the Planet Normal cockpit in November 2022, and listeners can hear what he had to say then by delving back into the Planet Normal archive. Like me, Gareth Wyn Jones was at this week's protest at Westminster, organised by the lobby group Farmers to Action. His voice on this recording is a little bit windswept because I recorded him when he was out on the Welsh Hills, where he and his family have farmed for hundreds of years.
Gareth Wyn Jones, great to have you back on Planet Normal. Tell us about this farmers rally. Why did you go? How was it for you?
Inspirational. We travelled down on the Friday, so we could get behind British farmers as they turned up into London and into Whitehall. It was just absolutely unbelievable to see that many tractors. We're talking about 13, 14, maybe even 1,500 tractors. And there's a couple of tanks there as well, driving down Whitehall to show our frustrations with the government about the inheritance tax, but a lot of other things as well. It's just not, I think the inheritance tax has been, the straw that broke the camel's back, but there's been a lot of other things. We've been downtrodden for many, many years by many different governments, to be honest with you.
How serious is this inheritance tax issue for farmers, Gareth? The Treasury says that only a third of farms will be impacted.
Treasury really knows about what's going on. Landowners, the ones that want hide money in land to stop paying tax. They should have brought they should have brought it in at 10, 15, 20 million. This is our working capital. Example, my father's 88, okay? He hasn't handed everything over. We always thought it was going to come over, when he passed and left this world, which was fine with me. But I worked all my life, okay? Not taking a big wage. Invested my time, my energy, my love back into the farm, back into the land. I am 57, nearly 58. I have put my life and blood, sweat, tears into that farm. My father, I pay tax. We both pay tax on everything, on the land we bought, on the tractors, on the infrastructure, on the people that have come and worked on our farms, to better everything we've got, so people can be fed affordably. So this is what they take that from the working people, 15 to 20% of our family farms. And Keir Starmer gave his word in the NFU conference to say that he was going to protect family farms. First budget, he hits us with inheritance tax. Now we're looking at it. It could be 60-70% of family farms that are going to be hit by inheritance tax. It's absolutely bonkers. These have no idea what they're doing or how to run a country or how to protect the people.
Could your family farm have to be broken up, Gareth, to pay the inheritance tax bill when your father passes away?
There's a good possibility I'll have to borrow some money, Neil, to protect what we've got here. I've got a son that's 26. He's very keen to come on board. Unfortunately, I've got other businesses, but I don't want to be taking one to paying for another, which is, it's ludicrous. But if you were there yesterday, as you were, and you spoke to the people there, the average farmer, the general farm, it's heartbreaking. It's crazy. And this industry was already on its knees. And then this bombshell then, it's the final nail in the agricultural coffin before it's too late, before we lose more people want to come into a debt-ridden business. There's no profit in it as it is. The majority of farmers are just ticking over. We hear the liberal lefties, they're saying, look at them riding around in their brand new tractors. Well, if we didn't have them tractors, you wouldn't be fed with affordable food. It's us that's taking the big risks by borrowing money. We can lose crops with snow, with rain, with all kinds of different dry weather. And we're the risk takers, supermarkets and people that are keeping that food cheap, and we are treated like they detest us, they hate us, they do not like us one bit because they haven't opened the door for 10 or 11 Downing Street to have a conversation with these working people. And don't forget, Liam, we've been in London 3 times on 3 occasions. I have many different rallies in Wales as well. We have had in Wales for 25 years against the Labour government. Now we've got it in Westminster and in the Senate, and it's even more difficult to get our voices heard. They think they have got everything. It's sleepwalking into food shortages, and there will be people going hungry. And the sadness of it is the poorer people in society are the ones that will suffer, because food will have to be inflated to make sure that farmers can make a little bit better living and to put that money aside to pay this inheritance tax.
What would you say, Gareth, to those who argue that there have been financiers, speculators using agricultural property relief to buy farmland that they've no intention of farming, and then they lease it to farmers? My proposal is that there should be a test. You only get agricultural property relief with no cap, which is what farmers want, which is currently the situation before these Labour proposals. If you can prove through your tax returns, and HMRC has all this information, that your family has been actively, daily involved in farming for at least 20 years, right? Then the pinstriped wellied brigade, the financiers and speculators who are using this tax relief that's there to protect family farms, there to protect our countryside, simply to dodge tax, that would be stopped. That abuse would be stopped. What do you think of that proposal?
I'm a farmer at the end of the day. I'd like to throw this into the mix as well. Okay, so let's lift the threshold up to begin with, a £9 million. And don't forget, this is working capital. But what I say as well, any farm that holds it down from generation to generation, and as long as that farm isn't sold, okay, and it's a working capital business passed on genuinely to the people that want to work the land. And I will tell you, there'll be a lot of farmers that'll be happy with that, because it will give a chance for some of the younger farmers to come in. We've got to remember, Liam, there's a lot of these big corporations, not just buying farms to rent them out to farm, but buying farms for solar. Nations come in from abroad so they can buy farms in Wales and England and Scotland, and then they can greenwash it. They can offset their carbon by planting trees on that land. That needs to stop today. That needs to have a line under it.
Well, there you go, Allison. Gareth Wyn Jones again. Sorry about the sound quality. This is what happens when you speak to a Welsh hill farmer in situ. He's the genuine article, and I'm sure we're going to return to this subject of inheritance tax on British family farms. I do think in the end the government's going to be forced to change its mind.
That was the Welsh rain and wind. I grew up in Halcombe, so sound quality was permanent throughout most of my formative years, I have to say. I was very proud of you to see you in a video speaking brilliantly at that farmers rally, and we will include a link in the show notes to it. And all the best to Gareth. I have to say that the sight of those tractors in Whitehall, a prairie of tractors, they lift the heart, don't they? There's something about tractors that's so gorgeous.
You like men in their machines, don't you?
Oh, just lovely. Well, Andrew, who won me for afternoon tea, has promised to let me have a go of his combine harvester. So that'll be.
You're such a tease.
Just to say that, we're often accused of, it's not all comfort and joy on Planet Normal, given this dreadful government. But I just want to say that this week we have seen a trickle of victories, Liam, for free speech and common sense. And I think that this now is a very, very welcome and positive direction. We saw Jamie Michael, former Royal Marine. Jamie spent 20 days in prison after posting a Facebook video calling for peaceful protest over illegal immigration after the Southport riots. Absolutely astonishing way to treat a man who had served his country so bravely. And it's very telling, Liam, I think, that at Merthyr Tydfil Crown Court, not far from Gareth actually, where he was accused of stirring up racial hatred, the case against Jamie Michael was dismissed by a jury within 17 minutes of deliberation, right? Let's just think about that. Okay, that's a normal bunch of men and women saying, you must be joking, which is what we say every week on Planet Normal. And just today, Wednesday, Christy Higgs, a Christian school worker who was sacked for sharing on Facebook. She was criticising plans to teach LGBT relationships to primary school children, a Christian woman, but just didn't want little children being given some of this very, very graphic sexual material. And Christy did indeed win her Court of Appeal battle over being dismissed. And because, that the judges said that the claimant, Christy, objecting to government policy on sex education in primary schools because of its promotion of gender fluidity, all these things that millions of normal people think are completely wrong. She was sacked for sticking up for the views, basically, of Planet Normal. And the judges basically said that, although what she'd said, some people might find it unpleasant, she'd never said anything of that kind in her work or had shown any discriminatory attitudes in her treatment of pupils. So let's just say Jamie Michael, Christy Higgs, two people have been caught up in the sort of identity politics, deep spiteful unpleasantness, and both the last couple of weeks have emerged victorious, basically found not guilty because common sense and decency are surfacing, Liam. I do think we may be at an inflection point. I hope so.
Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal.
Lots on this immigration cases. Harry says, will it be the case that the Gazans will fight to the death with anyone who says they should move to an Arab country? But if they have the chance of a council flat in Peckham and some cash, they will be on the next flight to Heathrow. We shall see. How cynical of you, Harry. And Jane says, English law was the foundation of the legal system worldwide, and yet here we are, slavishly adhering to some nebulous international law construct, which is a drag anchor on our country in terms of our culture, our economy, our global reputation for justice and competence. In fact, probably everything that was once positive about the UK and admired by the world. And Jim says, we just need to reverse a significant part of the Blair revolution. The only possible way to do this is to achieve a majority of MPs in Parliament who will support its reversal. But this in turn means the Tory party must be smashed into irrelevance. That's harsh, Jim. As a lifelong Tory supporter and voter, I first voted for Norman Tebbit in 1979. It grieves me to reach this conclusion, but the fact remains that even if a majority of Tory MPs supported such measures, a large minority would simply vote with the opposition or threaten to behind the scenes, resulting in a watering down to the point of abandonment. The Tories could deal with this problem by changing their rules and giving candidate selection back to the constituency party and the members, but they won't. So reform, I think, is the only hope, says Jim. The biggest challenge here is ensuring reforms stay on the straight and narrow and, like Trump, Musk, Millet, deliver on their promises.
Here's an email from Viv. Hi, Allison and Liam. As a Lincolnshire farmer's daughter, I'm angry the government isn't consulting with farmers about the spiteful and vindictive changes to inheritance tax. I was bowled over when I discovered Liam had been at the rally earlier this week and that he posted a most comprehensive thread on X. That means I wrote something on Twitter, social media. And I'm so very grateful for your involvement, Liam. How wonderful to have you on our side. Doesn't this government realise how dangerous their sudden introduction of IHT for farmers and small businesses might be? I thought we were all supposed to be aware of people's well-being and mental health. There are many accounts of older farmers wondering if it would be better for their children's financial future if they happened to die before April 2026. Not to mention the depression for everyone in what these days is a very lonely job for very little reward. How on earth can we get this changed? There's massive support generally, but also a lot of people who know nothing about farming and believe farmers to be rich, trying to avoid paying tax. Nothing could be further from the truth, as I know from growing up on Dad's farm. My dad was fortunate in that his elder brother farmed with him. They worked every day of the year and very efficiently, but it was hard, dedicated work. Will this government be responsible for tragedy on farms? Thanks both for keeping us sane. I listen every week and will continue to do so. I'm looking forward already to the next episode of Planet Normal. Best wishes, Viv.
Planet Normal listeners really enjoyed an interview we did before Christmas, Liam, with Emma Thompson and Admiral Sir James Bernal Nugent of Save the Parish, and they're just bringing us up to date. Dear Alison and Liam, the Admiral and I enjoyed being interviewed on Planet Normal. We thought your listeners might like an update this week as the Church of England's Parliament, the General Synod, is meeting. The debates can be watched online this afternoon, that's Thursday. There will be a debate about some new legislation known as the Governance Review. If enacted in its current form, it would allow parishes to be defunded even further. The Reverend Marcus Walker, who chairs Save the Parish, will be proposing an amendment to the legislation to the effect that we must not abandon the poorest parishes. We hope that the amendment will be well supported, as Save the Parish, having started as a protest group, is coming of age. This is an ideal opportunity for the Archbishop and bishops to rebuild trust, to show that they've heard all the cries from below. Some of the bishops are going around saying that you can only have the priest you can afford. If you are hearing this in your lives, please don't let it go unchallenged. It alters the model to a system of priests for the rich, which is an affront to the Bible. It's astonishing that the primacy of caring for the poor is being abandoned on planet Church of England. Lots of that kind of crazy priorities everywhere, I'm afraid. Very best wishes, Emma and the Admiral, James.
This is from Mari Allison. She's a legal expert and parent campaigning against the introduction of VAT on school fees by Labour, which was introduced last month. And by the way, it would be illegal if the UK was still in Keir Starmer's beloved European Union. The Prime Minister, of course, having spent the years 2016 to 2020 on the Labour front bench trying to prevent Britain from leaving, despite that historic referendum when more people voted to leave, 17.1 million, than have voted for anything ever in the history of these islands. Is he a lawyer or is he a politician? You decide. Anyway, Mari writes, Hi Alison and Liam, I'm back on my soapbox. We're nudging closer to a fixed timetable for the legal action against the government on this insidious and destructive VAT tax on education. Currently, we believe the case is set for the 1st to the 3rd of April. 3 cases are now consolidated at our end, but there's a little slippage on timings because, bless them, the government needs more time to prepare. Don't ask, in capital letters. Interestingly, The states recruited 4 King's Councils and God knows how many others to their merry band of meddlers. And remember, this defence and associated costs will be met by us, the taxpayers. How ironic, but a reminder that these extra costs chip away at any net benefit this shambolic government thinks this tax on education will raise. None of us are fooled. This tax raises nothing, no money, no raising of standards. I need not bleat on. Some extra stats worth bearing in mind, says Mari. Surveys suggest that 37,500 kids are leaving or not yet signing up to independent education who otherwise would have, and yet 27 local authorities have no spaces for these kids. Some 16,500 teachers are leaving this year, and this even before Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson recruits her 6,500 new shiny teachers she says will solve all the educational issues in state education, apparently paid for by introducing VAT on school fees. This policy is beyond laughable. And let's not forget some of the wonderful schools have already closed their doors with losses of jobs from across the piece, from groundsmen to dinner ladies, as well as teachers, because of these extra costs. So if you can, please join us inside and outside the High Court in April. We need our warriors championing our cause as ever. Grateful to you both for your heroic efforts. A very disgruntled mother, Mari.
We're totally with you, Mari. Absolute madness, this VAT on schools, and it's just going to get worse. Now, it's a kind of open secret that quite a lot of Planet Normal listeners are rather sweet on the co-pilot. Particularly since particularly since he lost the weight of at least 2 Labradors.
And I said, you still beat me in the weight loss competition.
You can't see me anymore. I'm a pipe cleaner now. Anyway, this is from Jess. I'm not sure who was more surprised when I stepped into Liam's path at last summer's Planet Normal event and blurted, "I love you, Halligan," right into his face. Though locked on a passage to the bar like some over-thirsty Scud missile, Liam stopped to speak with me like the unflustered and gracious model of mankind we all know him to be. Of course, what I had meant to express, says Jess, was simply how grateful I was to enjoy the continuity of reasoned thought, lively humour and grounded critical engagement provided by both Liam and Allison. I'm glad I get them.
But mostly Liam.
Mostly Liam. In an increasingly fruitcakey world. This February, however, says Jess, it is the Valentine season and my thoughts have turned to romance. Hey up. I find myself yearning for a rocketeer of my very own who lives up to that golden Halliganian standard. Is this an impossible ideal? I think we're being kidnapped. There's a dating app here, Halligan. As a 40-something born Londoner, says Jess, it is frustratingly difficult to meet anyone with a sensible worldview in a city where the rapidly expanding majority do not share my birthplace, my native culture or values, let alone a common language. I'm giving up on being endlessly charitable to performative lefty boyfriends who doggedly refuse to meet in the middle. It seems to me that if my lifetime mate is out there, he will be hungrily tuning into Planet Normal every Thursday, as I do. Will you please read out my letter, says Jess, in case my dream beau is out there and wondering where I am. Well, gentlemen, or, whatever you are, Jess is, throwing down the gauntlet or indeed the cape, waiting for you to come and pick it up. As an inducement, says Jess, to grant my Valentine's plea, I've written an achingly poor romantic poem, which I'm sure will have Bob the Bard spitting feathers. So here is Halliganian Man, with profuse apologies to Lord Byron.
Crikey.
He walks in duty, eyes alight, a boundless sage through lows and highs, and all that's best from left and right meet in his columns, books and jibes, a visionary of clearest sight, which gaudy GB News denies. Questioning more or question time less could not impair that Gaelic face, which waves in salt and pepper tress, stalwart, impervious to disgrace, where critical thoughts immovable express, how pure his right-thinking countenance. To kiss that cheek, here we go. To nuzzle that brow, so sharpened mind to long peruse. To Scooby his due, to draw the plough. Through peakest woke economic news, Halliganian Man, the time is now in loving longing to be your muse. Yours with hope, says Jess, and in the honest belief that truth and beauty will save the world. Oh my goodness.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's the best bid for email of the week I've ever come across.
Absolutely
And on that bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our flying refuge of reason views, our sanctuary of sweet reason. Email of the week, it's got to be Jess.
Yeah,
what can I say? So, Jess, send us your postal address to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk, and Allison will handle the email and send the Planet Normal mug to you. There will be a strict Chinese wall of propriety between me and your email, Jess. Thank you for all those emails, and thank you to Jess in particular.
If you enjoy Planet Normal, please do subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating and a review on Spotify, where we have some absolutely lovely comments, not all of them written by the Halliganian. So you can find us on the podcast app or wherever you listen, and it does help others to find us so the lovely Planet Normal family can grow.
And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our brilliant producers, Isabel Bouchard, Cass Ho, and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.